recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, for 5 minutes. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the Chairman for your comments saying you're open to different ideas with regard to restructuring our mortgage finance system. I think the one agreement is that doing nothing and keeping the status quo is unacceptable. You know, Fannie and Freddie played a leading role in adding fuel to the mortgage finance fire that burned down a good portion of our financial system and the economy as a whole. You know, by financing roughly 36% of the subprime housing market and increasing their leverage to 101, they really abuse the governmental granted advantages in the marketplace, and they run up a bill to the taxpayers of $85 billion and counting. You know, the total bailout costs of Fannie and Freddie are expected to climb much higher. When the Housing and Economic Recovery Act was passed, an arm-twisted CBO scored the GSE titles of the bill as $25 billion and said there was a less than a 50% chance that a bailout authority would ever be used and less than a 5% chance that the cost would ever run over $100 billion. You know, the chairman of this committee, Chairman Frank, chastised Republicans on the floor who said that the cost would likely go well over the CBO estimates. He said, "It's the most inflammatory arithmetic I ever heard." Well, the higher cost estimates being used by Republicans, he stated, "These numbers that are being thrown out are simply inaccurate and misleading," he said. Well, speaking of inaccurate and misleading, the CBO recently updated their scores, and the cost estimates have increased by over 1,500%. And so as we begin this month with a more formal debate over regulatory restructuring and providing the government with an explicit bailout authority, I think it's essential that any conversation begins and ends with GSEs, and any regulatory reform that does not include GSEs is not true reform. Fannie and Freddie were a large part of the problem, and reforming them should be a large part of the solution. Also, I'm very worried that proposals being discussed by the administration and some others to create a so-called systemic risk regulator will actually create what amounts to another new set of government-sponsored entities. By creating a new systemic risk regulator, we could essentially establish a dozen new Fannie and Freddies that will be too big to fail and have the inherent market advantage that will come with that distinction. As our distinguished ranking member from Alabama points out, this will be privatizing profits, and socializing risk is a bad business model, and we should learn from our past mistakes, not repeat them. So going forward, I do believe it's very important that we have a viable and liquid secondary mortgage market to provide additional funding so that people can experience the American dream of owning their own homes. And one tool that I believe that we can do that with is something I've talked about here before, and that's covered bonds. You know, covered bonds are debt instruments offered by financial institutions. They're backed by collateralized pool of mortgages. Investors purchase these bonds, and the pool of mortgages are treated as secure collateral. Investors also continue to have a full recourse on the institution in case there's a failure. This type of securitization is widely used in Europe to provide liquidity over there, and I believe we can do it here in the U.S. as well. I also want to thank Chairman Frank for his comments some time ago when he said he would hold a hearing on this important topic, and I do look forward to working with him and all my colleagues as we continue to move forward on this. So I want to again thank the Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses as well coming forward. Thank you.